It just seems like a kind of a chaos moment behind the scenes. I mean, this is not what the viewers usually get to see, but it was me running around and Varsha running around trying to find an email and just chaos. And of course our guests looking just kind of serenely putting up with our nonsense. So, yeah.
I have no idea what happened, but usually I'm much more prepared. And for some reason, I couldn't find the dang email to let me log on to this meeting. But that is because this has been a very long week in life, in history and in life. So
it's not like there's anything else going on in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nothing at all. So, yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
So is everybody ready? Should we get going?
I'm ready. I'm pouring my tea. I'm good to go.
Fantastic.
I'm ready as well.
So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for, I think this is episode 22 of Drinking with Historians. I'm Matt, and of course, you know Varsha, and our guest today is Dana Schwartz, who you may know through Twitter, and this is how I first found out about her. This is, I'm ashamed to say, through the guy in your MFA Twitter handle, which as an academic just rang so true. Then of course, the author of a book based on that, The White Man's Guide to White Male Writers of the Western Canon. But I think the reason you're here is because she's now the host of this amazing podcast called Noble Blood, and I believe a book that will be coming out soon. Well, maybe not soon, but sometime about that as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
nice.
Excellent. So
not
fantastic.
Too soon. I have to write it first, but yeah. Probably 2022. Yeah.
Okay, but that's phenomenal, and it's going to be amazing. And I was saying to Dana before we started that once we announced our guest that she would be joining us, I had probably a dozen people email me and say, oh, "She's the Noble Blood person. That's amazing!" So we're extraordinarily excited about it.
Thank you so much. That is so ridiculously flattering, truly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got to say, like, ragging on royals is one of my favorite things in the entire world. So this is going to be great. So.
It's the best thing that I learned to do in European history. Whenever I took European history classes, it's my favorite thing to do.
It's the best. It's like tabloid culture and history all in one. It's so fun.
So much fun.
That's
I think
right.
the tabloid culture
So
is
much fun.
exactly right. You don't realize how much of a tabloid culture it is until you get to like maybe the 20th century and like Victorian era. But even before that, it was immensely like tabloid culture. Even during like the French Revolution, when like press is just getting going, that's when people really start talking about like Louis the 16th can't get it up, and like, you know, so
can't fit his lock into the hole.
that is my favorite Louis the 16th story, is that he cannot fit his like key into the lock. And that is how, and that's exactly how people in France talked about it at the time. And I was like, damn, it's so embarrassing to be king.
Oh, it's one thing that I've learned from doing this podcast long enough is at no point in history would I actually want to be a monarch. It is almost uniformly awful across the board.
It's a more thankless job.
It is awful.
Yeah, it's a more thankless job than New York City mayor. Like, I feel like there's very few thankless jobs in the realm of this universe. Like, number one is New York City mayor. Number two is like royal. And like number three is Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher at Hogwarts. Like all three. Like, they're just, you don't want to have that job.
No, it is actively bad and boring. I think people confuse being royalty with being rich. And being rich is great. Being rich would always be awesome. I would love to be rich. No, being a royal is bad.
Yeah.
It seems terrible. And I mean, like, I was going to do the fancy, like, well, let me tell you about tabloid culture in the Middle Ages, because it wasn't a whole lot better then. So I think being a royal, like, I think it is, like, I think people think of, when they think of royals, like they think of the kind of divine right of kings and this characterization of this absolute power where you could be debauched like Nero, right? In some way. And that's kind of appealing in this really interesting way. But it's just not like that at all. So,
I mean, you can be debauched, right? But then people get mad at you and there are consequences. Wouldn't it be so much more fun just to be a rich private citizen being debauched?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, if they weren't terrible people like Jeff Bezos and, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and stuff like that, I mean.
They seem like their lives are pretty good.
Yeah.
They seem to be enjoying it. Yeah, so.
we might get a cameo in this podcast. Right behind the microphone at this very moment is my cat, Beetlejuice. So if he wanders into frame, that's just fair warning.
Oh
If
my
I
God,
say
that's
his
such
name,
a great
three
name.
times will he appear?
Oh, we can try.
Yeah. Yeah, my cat, I have two cats and they wander in and out of frame sometimes. It seems like whenever I'm on a Zoom call is the only time one of them wants to sit on my lap.
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
Oh, he's
There
so
she
cute.
is.
Oh man, what a cat.
This is already the best episode we've ever had, Varsha.
I agree. This is the best episode we've ever done. All episodes should have pets in them. I think that's like the best thing to do. That's like the best thing to come out of Zoom is more people have seen more pets in their natural habitats at home.
I'll just keep him on my lap the whole time and stroke him. That feels very royal, right? Just like
and
That's
James
right,
Bond
just,
villain type,
Yeah,
Definitely.
you should swivel while you're doing it. So
Yeah.
just to get it together. So please, Varsha, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say the only royal that I ever really liked was Julie Andrews in and Anne Hathaway, like Princess and Queen of Genovia. Those are the only two royals I've ever liked in fiction or in real life. And yeah,
they seem awesome. I would absolutely want to live in Genovia. I will take
agreed.
whatever vague European accent they all have.
It's great.
Well, the great thing about those movies, which I have of course watched, is that the accents are never consistent.
No.
Right, like they're vaguely kind of Central European-ish, but sometimes they're English and sometimes they're not, and it's just like, and then there's a little French thrown in there sometimes. Like it's just
sometimes they're mostly British, and then sometimes like I feel like it's like a weird like Switzerland country where maybe in different regions they have different accents, but that's never explained, and I love it all the more for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I was wondering if I wanted to ask about the podcast, right? So I think the first question is like, well, I mean, we've been talking about kind of why, but like what inspired you to kind of do the Noble Blood specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So I am not a historian. That just, I loved history in college and luckily I was actually pre-med in college, but I went to Brown, which has no core curriculum. So once I did all my pre-med requirements, I was just taking all these English literature and history classes, like the things that I loved. And then as I was graduating and, planning on going to med school, there was this like awful moment where it's like, oh, wait, the thing that I chose to learn about when I didn't have to learn about things was always liberal arts. So maybe I should try to do that for my job. So I tried to make it as a writer. I moved to New York and, worked in magazines and television. And I just, I loved writing and I love the variety in my daily life. I don't think I have the patience and discipline to get into academia. It just seems like such an intimidating and scary world to me. So that was never even a thing I considered. But I loved history and I loved stories from history. And I wanted a podcast that told me just like interesting narrative stories from history. I come from like novel writing and I come from screenwriting. Like I want that beginning, middle, and end. And so I pitched Aaron Mahnke, who's the creator of this amazing podcast called Lore, and he put me in touch with his bosses at iHeartRadio. And we talked about, Noble Blood, which was just like bite-sized stories where I could do the two things that I love most in the world, which is like learning about weird historical royals and then writing stories and combine them and talking to a mic. So that's how it came about. And the reason I wanted to make it about royals is like, that's just the subject matter that I was always naturally fascinated by and drawn to. Like I'm not like a monarchist. I don't think any of them are, I mean, some of them are good, but I think it's a bad idea just to put like a random son in charge of the country. But it's fascinating to me, this idea like that you basically choose at random a genetic lottery, a random person to have all of the power in a country, even though nothing necessarily qualifies them. And we have so much like of the ephemera that like I feel like everyone in America specifically is like really fascinated by with regards to the royal family, maybe because we don't have one, but like the ceremony and the money and the pageantry and the costumes, like the same thing I think that like we like the Kardashians and like looking and gasping at like extreme wealth and power and like So all of those factors, I'm rambling, but all of those factors combined into making a podcast that sneakily means I get to get paid to read historical biographies.
So much fun. An important listener has reminded us that we didn't introduce our drinks. So let me just quickly do that. And then I'll ask Matt and I'll ask Dana. I am drinking 1792. No particular reason other than it reminds me of the French Revolution, even though it has nothing to do with that. And it's a really good bourbon. So I thought it was apt for this episode. And the one thing I like to remind people about the French Revolution is its main reasons I got into history is royals as well as violence. So my ninth grade teacher, I don't know if he was telling the truth or not, but he told us that those in the front row of the Place de la Revolution during Louis XVI's execution could feel his blood splatter on their faces when his head got cut off. And I remember being in the second row in my ninth grade history class and like verbally yelling, awesome. And like that was like the moment where I was like, this is for me. I must study this. I've told this story a lot, but it genuinely is true. That is when I was like, whoa, this revolution stuff is amazing. So that's why I like studying royals, is because they're fascinating. And then a couple weeks later, we got to study Napoleon and Josephine's adorable love letters, which is also, they're also a little weird. So yeah. So Matt, what are you drinking?
Also pretty saucy. I have a cocktail today. I made something called a Toronto, which has some rye and then an Amaro called Fernet Branca, and just a little bit of simple syrup. So it's very tasty. And then I have some Larceny bourbon for later on. So and Dana, what are you drinking? We welcome all sorts of drinkers on Drinking with Historians.
I'm very impressed by that cocktail. It's 4:00 in Los Angeles, so I did withhold from alcohol. I'm drinking. I can grab it. Sleepy Time Throat Tamer tea, which is what I keep at my desk because I do a lot of podcasting and I'm always talking into a mic. So I kind of always have Throat Tamer tea ready to go. So yeah, cheers to that.
Smart.
Cheers to all of us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So now that I've asked you about your drink, the one question I have is, there is a lot of representation, because since you've worked in media before, there's a lot of representation of royals in media, right? Yeah. There is the multitude of English queens that are represented in CW shows and other shows. There's Queen Victoria, which is a PBS show. There's The Crown, obviously. There's The Tudors, which is based on, you know, your time with doing Noble Blood, which is like the least effective show, in your opinion, when it comes to getting people into the royals. Ooh. Or into royal blood as like a history?
You know, I think I've watched a lot of them and a lot of varying levels of good and bad. I think I'm so sorry, I'm speaking with professors. I get very nervous. I go into college mode again. Part of the reason I did want to do Noble Blood and why I worked my hardest to research it a lot is because the stories themselves are very fascinating, and it's interesting to me to try to understand the characters involved as real people without projecting like, she's just like a mean girl in high school, you know, without projecting like anachronistic understanding. So that's a fun challenge for me. So I've watched like some truly awful in terms of historical accuracy shows like Reign on the CW, if you've heard of that one.
Yes.
And The Great, which I actually love. I mean, historically wild, but like it's so fun. But I will say both of those shows are not the worst because they're fun enough that I hope they get people interested, that they keep learning about royal history to find out what's. Mm-hmm. So I would honestly say to me, the worst one is if you saw Victoria on PBS, which I didn't like because I thought it was boring. Yeah. The cardinal sin for me for a historical TV show is it can't be boring. At least if it's not going to be historically accurate, make it fun so people want to learn. Like, I don't think people will think TV shows are textbooks. So make it fun so that they want to learn more. Just don't make it boring. Don't make it feel like we have to like take notes. Yeah. What did you think of Victoria? I couldn't even get through it all the way.
I only watched like 2 episodes because at that point I was taking a British history class on the Empire, and I was like, you know, I feel like I read all of this in the textbook that I was just assigned like 2 weeks ago. And so even though I love the actor, I forget her name.
Jenna Coleman. Yeah, she's great.
Jenna Coleman. yeah, she's great. She's great in Doctor Who, but I was like, I don't need to watch this. Yeah. One thing that really fascinates me is you were talking about American obsession with royalty.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you are currently on the obsession train with The Crown, because as a historian who dabbles a little bit in British history, I don't understand how the royal family has accepted the crown as like existing, like why they haven't sued it out of existence. I'm sure there isn't like they're not allowed to sue it out of existence, but it seems like really damaging to the image of the royal family.
But they can't,
family
right?
season.
They're
Yeah.
not allowed to sue that.
Yeah,
They're public figures.
exactly. So
I think
that's another reason.
I love The Crown. And honestly, it makes me love the royal family more. Like I knew that they were weird monsters. Like that's just like who they are. So at least like now you have like wonderful actors playing them and have make an approximation of human emotions.
Yeah.
I never thought I would watch Gillian Anderson play Margaret Thatcher, because I never wanted to watch a Margaret Thatcher movie after Meryl Streep played her.
Yeah.
But she has taken my heart, like Be Still, my neoliberal heart, because I was watching it and I was like, do I like Margaret Thatcher? No, obviously I don't, but what? So
I'm so excited. I love The Crown. I love how like I described it to someone who didn't watch it as it is a show in which the main challenge of the protagonist is to do nothing. She'll want to do something, she'll want to say something, but every episode, in what new and exciting way can the main character not do anything? And what a wild delight that is, right? Because being a queen, I'm like blowing out my microphone because I'm so excited. But like the challenge of being a queen is to be a non-person. You like are more of a right now they're mascots. They're not humans. She has to be a non-entity. So how wild is it that every episode is her faced with a challenge of someone trying to get her to say or do a thing, and every episode is her not doing or saying the thing.
That was the best part about the first season, is that it actually taught me a lot about what historians write about the royalty, or who write about the royal family, are talking about when they talk about the transformation of royalty into like an actual thing with power into like a figurehead, right? Because you hear that talked about a lot. The royal family are basically figureheads, but you don't really understand it as like a lay person who doesn't really care about the royal family or that type of British history until you watch The Crown and you realize, yeah, she's not doing anything. And like her family is telling her not to do anything. The prime minister is telling her not to do anything. And all of the country is telling her not to do anything, but they all want to watch her wedding. And I was like, that is a really tough job.
So let me jump in here. I've never seen The Crown. Maybe I've seen like one episode or something like that. But like this is something that like Americans are obsessed. It's not just necessarily with royalty. It's like the British royal family, right? The English royal family. Like they're absolutely kind of fascinated with this. So where does that come from? I mean, is it just the wealth thing, or is it? I mean, because they know kind of I think most Americans know kind of the functional structure of British government, and there's a parliament. The Queen's kind of nominally in charge of things, but not really. And like you were saying, Dana, like her whole point is like not to do anything. Right, to be there. And like, so the biggest scandal is when they're in the news and the whole Meghan and Harry thing and stuff like that. So what is it about royals that seems to fascinate Americans?
I have a theory about this, and this is basically, spoiler alert, sort of the entire premise of the book I'm writing, basically like why we love royals so much. I think it's a few factors. I think wealth is one of them. Wealth, fashion, and wish fulfillment on a basic level. The same reason that we care about celebrities. More the reason that we care more about like the actors who like wear elaborate dresses to red carpets than the ones who just like quietly do their films and then like disappear. Like we like that. I think everyone wants to feel important, right? And we all want to direct our attention to something that has an intrinsic value attached to it. Like you don't want to be the fan to like a mediocre pop singer. I think that there's something, even though we don't believe that the monarchy is ordained by God anymore, we still fundamentally believe that like by being born into the royal family, there is importance there. Mm-hmm. And so I think everyone wants to be important, right? So there's the wish fulfillment of it and the fantasy that all Americans have and all American media has of, you could marry a prince, and if you're beautiful enough, or if you're kind enough, or if you're charming enough, a prince will find you and elevate you to the royal family. So like everything about our culture communicates to us that the princes and princesses are the kindest or smartest or most beautiful, even though they're not. And then we get this fun paparazzi tabloid culture of getting able to analyze and tear them apart. It's like fair open season. Like we feel that because we've elevated them to this status, we're allowed to be as mean or judgmental as we want. And like humans love doing that. We love judging people.
Is there an assumption of like, I was really interested because you mentioned the Kardashians earlier, right? Like, I mean, like if you were thinking about American royalty, like it is kind of the Kardashians, and at least like they're in that pantheon of, so is it part of it kind of an assumption of emptiness too, though?
Yeah, I think part of the appeal with the royal family, right, is we can project whatever we want on them, so they'll never disappoint us. Where I was thinking about this because I rewatched all of from the period of like 2000 to 2006, there were about 3 or 4 movies all about like being the first daughter of the president.
Yes,
like that
Chasing Liberty,
and First Daughter, and My Day with the President's Daughter. Like it was the fantasy of being the daughter of a president. And in all these movies, what I found was very interesting was they never touch at all any of the president's politics. We don't even find out if he's a Democrat or Republican. The closest we get to like someone talking about policy is someone will say like, what do you think about your father's domestic policy? Like that's the closest. Because like we want her to be like the wish fulfillment character, right? She's like an American princess. And we want her to be above that in the sense that like, we don't want to be like, oh, your dad's doing, subconsciously want her to be above all that. And I think that's something that the royal family fulfills, right? Like Beyonce is very smart at like maintaining a mystique, because the second that Beyonce like actually is a human being, it's not going to be as like cohesive or articulate or curated as like an album release will be. Like her giving a casual interview, she'll like slip up or say something normal or human. Where the power of the monarchy is that they're different than us and better than us and inhuman in that way. They don't have the human faults of being tedious, of being, whatever, like the pettiness. Like we can't judge them on a policy level, or we don't want to. So like, I think every time the Kardashians like speak out about power or like a controversial issue, they're sort of diminishing their own power in a weird way, in a twisted like Chinese finger trap way.
Yeah, I mean, there's moments, right, where Kim was like at the Trump White House, right, and she was like advocating for prison reform or something like that, and it seemed unreal, like that wasn't what she was supposed to be doing, right? But when she tweets about like renting a private island for her whole friends like during quarantine, like that makes sense,
and we all go crazy, like we love judging it and like giving it our attention. I think that America, because I'm so sorry, I'm talking so much. Do all guests rant this much?
Absolutely.
Good. Clearly,
and you're not ranting. No, we're asking you questions and you're answering them. So
because America doesn't have a royal family, we sometimes sort of project that onto our first family. Like I think like that's why we had so many first daughter movies, and I think we sort of did that with the Obamas, and maybe like to some degree like Chelsea Clinton and like the Bush girls and like. Yeah. But what ruins that is that their fathers do actual policy and like exist in a government system, and then of course like someone else became president, I guess. I
read about that somewhere.
Yeah. Whatever. I mean, somewhere.
We sort of do that with first ladies, though. So if you think of Jackie O as like the first example, I'm sorry if I missed that. You already said that.
No, please.
Jackie O and like her kids after JFK is assassinated, but even before, they're like icons, right? And then afterwards, when LBJ becomes president, like Lady Bird is super important. And then during FDR's presidency, Eleanor is crazy important. And so it takes a while, but like the first ladies sort of keep this role as like royalty as well. But I do think the problem, the reason that declines recently probably is not because of the politics of the current president, but that the children who are supposed to be exhibiting the royalty of America get involved in the political process, right?
Yeah.
So Malia and Sasha Obama were not making policy, even if they were old enough to. The Bush sisters were not making policy, right? They were just, you know, for lack of a better term, like figureheads, examples of the perfect family the president had. And so, yeah.
And this is also, I think, another really smart point you're making with regards to like the American presidency and royalty. I think part of the reason that Jackie and JFK loom so large in our mythology is because he died young, and so he's frozen in amber and in tragedy. Yeah. I think like the same way, you know, Princess Diana and like most of the royals I talk about on my podcast were also drawn and fascinated by tragedy. And I think that I don't want to use the wrong word here, but like elevates them because it's so dramatic. You know what I mean? It's inhuman, these tragedies, that they become objects of morbid fascination.
Yeah. So is there, I mean, is it possible, like, so one of the things, I mean, that you mentioned at the very beginning, and one of the things that I think Varsha and I like really love, and why we wanted to do, you know, the show in the first place, is because we think stories are great, and that this is the best way to kind of talk about the past, is because you can tell an engaging story. And as I was talking with somebody just the other day, it's like good history is better when it's complex, because stories are better when they're complex. Like, you don't want a very simple narrative, because then it's just boring, right? You need drama and you need intrigue and stuff like that. So like in your you know, in your podcast, like what's your favorite scandal, royal scandal?
My favorite scandal, I am obsessed with Marie Antoinette. She was the figure that got me into history, I think, because I sort of love that macabre, tragic undercurrent there.
Yeah.
You know, that we love the high highs and we love the low lows.
Yeah.
It's like a very human thing, I think, also. My favorite scandal is the diamond necklace affair, which was maybe the first catfish in history, or at least the most prominent one. But it is a woman named Jeanne de la Motte. My French is atrocious. I'm trying Rosetta Stone, but it's not taking. A woman named Jeanne de la Motte writes to a cardinal pretending to be Marie Antoinette, and she pretends to be like Marie Antoinette's best friend, and she's delivering the letters back and forth. And over a period of months, she gets this cardinal to not only like donate to what he thinks are Marie Antoinette's like pet charities, and really it's just this one woman, but also sort of thinks that he's having an emotional like affair with Marie Antoinette. And then when he comes and she convinces him to buy her, Marie Antoinette, a multi-million-dollar diamond necklace, because she, Marie Antoinette, I'm air quotes, in case anyone's just listening to this, is like, you know, people think I spend too much. It would look so bad if I bought this necklace. Could you buy it for me and I'll pay you back? I can't buy it now. It'll look bad. You get it. And he's like, yeah, all right. He gets the necklace, gives it to Jeanne de la Motte to deliver it to Marie Antoinette, who, you know, gives it to her boyfriend to ferry away to France to break it up and sell it. A few weeks later, this cardinal arrives at Versailles and is like, hey, Marie Antoinette, about that diamond necklace, can I have that money? It's now, I know you said keep this correspondence a secret, but I need that. And she's like, what the hell are you talking about? It all comes to light, the entire scandal. But the country had so been poisoned against like the Austrian whore Marie Antoinette by this point, that when the scandal comes out and they take him to court, the royal family takes this cardinal to court for like disparaging the royal name. And because over the course of this con, they hired a prostitute to pretend to be Marie Antoinette, and he fell for it. And that's also, you can't do that. You can't mistake a prostitute for your queen. Over the course of this trial, he came from a very powerful family who basically called fake news, and they got they were all sitting front row of this trial saying our son did nothing wrong. Jeanne de la Motte is gone by this point. Everyone turns against Marie Antoinette. They say, we don't know how she was involved. but it's her fault. She orchestrated this thing because she hated this cardinal and wanted to bring him down. She wanted this necklace. Oh, wait, she didn't get this necklace? Okay, well then she just wanted to bring the cardinal down. You know, like they kept trying to find ways to blame Marie Antoinette, to the point where contemporary writers after the revolution wrote that the French Revolution can be traced back to the diamond necklace scandal. It so poisoned the populace against Marie Antoinette that facts, logic, reason about who she was as a person at that point no longer mattered.
Wow. I mean, this isn't about royals per se, but this type of interest in like this con woman and what she does and how she basically defames the royal family. It reminds me of a recent obsession of Americans is con women. So Americans are obsessed with like Anna Delvey and like Elizabeth Holmes, and like that's a new type of like royalty, is like when you are able to inject yourself into a world you don't belong in, and then you may get caught or you might not get caught, but when the story breaks, it's like you're an icon suddenly for some reason.
Like
for the,
Caroline Calloway. She also like has that weird thing, like she went to Cambridge, so we love romanticizing that. It's the power and the scam. It's like sweet and salty together. Like the tastes of like extreme wealth and extreme Schadenfreude go really well together.
Yeah.
wow.
It's like, but it's something, I think it's something about gender too. Like, I think what Varsha was saying too, is like, I think there's some, like, we know the icon, like Americans know the icon of the con man, right? But it's really interesting when it's a woman. And I'm thinking too, like this it seems like ages ago, but it wasn't actually that long ago. The Theranos and Elizabeth, what's her name or something like
Elizabeth
that.
Holmes.
Right?
Elizabeth
Elizabeth Holmes, right? So the list goes on. Is like they become this icon in which you're kind of fascinated by and you hold them up, but at the same time, like they're kind of terrible, right? Like so, So I think that's really interesting to fit Marie Antoinette into this long line in which she wasn't actually, the con man. I mean, she's absolutely the victim, but somehow she's at fault, right? Because she fits the stereotype in some particular way.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's sort of like a new incarnation of a femme fatale.
Yeah, definitely.
A twist on that trope, right?
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So my question is the opposite of a femme fatale. I don't remember this because I was very young when this happened, but everyone on the internet seems to be obsessed with Princess Diana. And I know you haven't done a podcast episode on it yet, but can you tell us why you think Americans were really into Princess Diana?
Yeah. So I, disclaimer, was also too young to sort of remember her in her lifetime. Although I did remember getting a purple Princess Diana beanie baby, which is a very weird thing that exists. From what I've learned, and I think the crown probably also feeds into this mystique, she, we love the fairy tale, right, of the young woman marrying the prince. She was incredibly beautiful, incredibly fashionable, but I think she also felt like an outsider in the royal family, which I think was appealing to a lot of people who, I mean, we're all outside the royal family. And I think at that time of the media transition from mystery to like, now we can know everything because of paparazzi, she was like an audience surrogate in a way. Like she was like someone who symbolized like kindness and seemed to genuinely care about people in a way that like the royal family up to that point had been only cold and passive. And speaking out of and how she is supposed to be a queen, but I think she didn't evolve for the times in a way that people seem to want or thought they want, and Diana did. Diana knew how to use media, and Diana felt human and flawed. And so I think we liked that. And I think we also liked seeing her fall, unfortunately. Like, I think the scandal of the divorce and the same thing with JFK, like the tragedy of her death means she's frozen in amber. And there's the macabre what if. I mean, if scrolling through Netflix teaches anyone anything, it's that the American population loves dead, beautiful white women. That's just like our favorite thing in the world. Like, it's our favorite thing. Cannot get enough dead white women. And then bonus points if they're like wealthy and beautiful and seem to have it all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if there's tragedy attached, then all the more better, right? Like some sort of backstory that. So I think we should, if it's okay, I think we should move. We have some really wonderful questions in the Q&A, and I want to make sure that we have some time for those. One of the ones I wanted to start with is like, all right, so you can have historically any royal on your Noble Blood podcast. Who do you invite?
Ooh, I get to talk to them?
Yeah, you get to talk to them.
And in English, and that's fine.
In English, yep.
Well, we can pretend like there's a universal Star Trek translator. So sure, yeah.
Okay, I will say Lord Byron.
Ooh,
because I think he would be a good conversationalist.
Yeah, and you can totally chide him about the way he treats his wife. So.
Oh yeah. He's a terrible human being, but I also would love to meet him and see what he's like in person. He fascinates me. I'm sort of obsessed with him as a person.
So what is it about Byron that fascinates you? I'm a simple medievalist. Like anything after 1200, like I don't like it's all I don't know. So
I don't want to swear on this podcast in case there are children watching.
Please fucking swear if you want to fucking swear.
Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank
you.
Yeah. He's like a classic romantic era fuckboy, which is hilarious to me that archetype exists so clearly in everything he did in his life. I'm just fascinated by like his like sad goth boy sleeping with everyone, seducing everyone, writing poetry drunk, wanting to be a hero. Like everything about him is so larger than life. And I wonder what historians have projected onto him. And that's why I want to meet him to be like, okay, well, what were you like that does all this? He just seems like here's what I'll say. I think a lot of historical royals were boring people. And that is probably maybe why they were more successful in being royals. I don't think Lord Byron would be a boring person. You know, like I wouldn't want to have dinner with Queen Victoria. Like I just think she would be dull. I mean, I would want to ask her questions, but she wouldn't answer any of my questions. You know, I would want to know these intimate things and she would just be like pish posh. But Byron would tell me anything.
I agree.
Yeah, he would be sauced like halfway through, right? And then like he would just like,
yeah.
No, if I had to interview like an American version of like a royal, I think I would stick to like JFK or Nixon because they would tell you everything, right? While other presidents have some decorum and they would be like, no, I'm not telling you this. But
yeah, you want someone who's going to be fun and tell you things that you couldn't get in the history books. And like, there's no way Queen Victoria is going to tell you anything more intimate than we already know. But Byron will go.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you can tell that from his writing and his poetry. He's just extra mile there. Yeah.
He brought a bear to Oxford.
So another question.
I mean, who hasn't? But fair enough. Yeah.
Another question that I have that's sort of based on the questions that we got is so you did 3 episodes, I think, on Henry VIII's wives.
I did all 6. I did 6 episodes.
You did all 6.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. So I haven't listened to all 6. I only listened to a couple of them. I listened to the Catherine of Aragon one. But how did you approach studying Henry VIII's wives? Like, did you try to approach them as like separate entities from all the crap that's going on in their lives, or did you try to figure out what they thought about their situation and why they chose the life they were in?
I am so glad you brought that up because that was like one of my favorite series to work on. A thing that was really important to me is finding a story from their life that wasn't in the conventional narrative. I feel like pop culture has really dug up and reburied and dug up the tired old wife, Catherine of Aragon, replaced by the charming Anne Boleyn. So I wanted to find moments or conflicts of their lives that would show them as human beings and not just like trapped in the narrative of that we already know. And so with Catherine of Aragon, I started with her before she even knew Henry VIII, when she was married to his brother Arthur, because like that was when she was sort of like hot shit. And she was like the new girl in town. And it's a fun narrative in which like Henry VIII is her Prince Charming. Like he really does rescue her from this sort of diplomat that I focused on. I think that so much of her is like her as the seductress, like her as the witchy, like other woman. And so I did her trial and death because I think it's very humanizing, everything's stripped away. And for the other women, I think that people don't focus on them quite as much. And so I wanted to make them as human as possible. I read as much as I could to try to figure out who they were as people outside of Henry. Like I purposefully framed the episodes about each of the wives and not Henry, because he gets a ton of attention. And of course he comes out through each of the episodes, but the wives are usually accessories to him and not the other way around.
Yeah, definitely. Right. They're accessories to the story of like the creation of the Church of England. And that's really what anybody cares about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, that's a really interesting point, because I think like in a lot of our previous guests have talked about too, is just kind of refocusing what you're talking about. It's just moving, from Henry to, the woman next to him. It really changes what you're seeing, in that particular picture. So it's not always about kind of the person in power, but the people who are there with them. So.
Yeah, and I mean, with me, sorry, I'm boiling tea, so I hope it doesn't get too hard to hear. There we go. I also find I think it's a very political, I don't talk about politics a lot. Sometimes I make what commenters think are very snide comments about the present day political situation. And then I get mean emails from people going like, I'll never listen again. It's like, oh, okay. Well, sorry that I made like a little joke about like Don Jr. But I do think any podcast about power is inherently political. Like, what is royalty but political power? And then what political about me is where I choose to focus who has the power. I'm not deciding, but deciding in the narrative.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one thing that I tell my students when I teach US foreign policy is a lot of students will take that class because it's a requirement, and they'll jump into the class and like they'll tell me the main thing they're worried about is they don't really want to read about a bunch of old white people making decisions for the rest of the country. And I'm like, I understand completely, but it's important as historians, as you point out, to not just study about how power inflicts itself on people, but also how power is wielded. If you want to understand that, and so that's what I find interesting about studying the nobility and studying royals specifically, is when they had power, they did fascinating stuff with it. Not just like, rumored to have, had sexual relations with a horse. They did other like legitimately interesting things with their power.
I did an episode about Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii, who is someone that I never learned about in school, but the narrative of how and why white male business interests overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy so that then Hawaii could become a state. It was an interesting and important one to me. And it was so funny. That was also an episode where I got a lot of angry emails from people being like, why do white guys have to always be the bad guys? I'm like, I didn't write this. This happened. This is historical. Like, I'm sorry. And they're like, well, why did you specify that they were white? And it's like, well, that informed their decision-making. They felt entitled to claim this land because they saw the people that lived there as less than. They didn't try to claim Germany, like that fed into their mentality. And so it was very strange to me that people seemed so defensive about like a historical occurrence, things that actually happened.
Yeah.
So
no, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so you talked a lot about how you use a lot of political biographies for to start off your research. Are there any other like primary sources that like you remember or you got to look at, even if they were just online?
Ooh, yeah. I this is now awful that to say, like, I do so many episodes that like I feel like the research like leaves my brain, like the stories remain, but like I'm on such a treadmill of like an episode of research and then like writing it and then recording it and then working on the new episode that like I don't sit with each episode as long as I wish I could. I will say I have an amazing research assistant. So I was doing it. It was a one-woman show, the podcast, for like the first 8-9 months I was doing it. And at that point, oh, hi, Beetlejuice. He's back. He's my research assistant. No, at that point, I was, the iHeartRadio let me hire a research assistant who is truly amazing. Her name is Hannah. She's a PhD student at Stanford history. She's, yeah, great. And she puts together like the 100-page PDF of like the primary sources that I need. So it cuts the step of me having to like find the things. So
that's
that is
a dream.
Truly the gift. It's the best.
Shout out to Hannah. Oh my God.
Shout out to Hannah. So yeah, every like 2 weeks I get like an 100-page packet of primary and secondary sources and go from there. And I think that it makes the quality of my research so much better because again, I'm not trained as a historian and it takes me a long time I'm so embarrassed to like admit this in front of actual professors. I don't have like a great muscle yet for reading primary sources. So I think it like takes me twice as long as it takes me to read other things. But to save the time of finding them and to put that time into like reading them is invaluable for me.
It just makes it's so cool that you use primary sources because I feel like it is definitely like a muscle that you have to learn to use, something that like everybody is born with, because like the way that I teach right now, the undergrad classes that I teach that you probably remember from Brown is that they're really primary source based, at least like the survey ones, right?
Yeah.
Like my students right now are reading about the gold rush and they're reading about like violence among Native Americans and white Americans and Chinese Americans. And they just get really into it and they're reading, newspaper articles. And they're also reading about antebellum sex in, Southern America. And so when they get into these documents, when they first read them, they're like super worried that they're not understanding anything. But after a couple of times and a couple of these books that they've read, they're like, I get what's happening now. And like, they get super excited. So I think that's awesome that you get to look at primary sources.
I'm working on the muscle. And I will say, I think the reason that now I'm like so committed to doing all that reading is because if just doing like cursory, like internet research, which sometimes I do before I dive into the actual
before you
sources.
choose a topic. Yeah.
And just to like get a lay of the land before I know like what area I want to specifically dive into. You find things that are wrong and just repeat it a lot. And you kind of have to go back and back and back until you find the primary source where you're like, oh, one guy wrote this and they were wrong. And now everyone has just said it. Like simple things, like ages of people and like the names of children, like dumb things that are just repeated out of rote. So that is terrifying to me and also very exciting whenever I feel like I'm the detective. I solved it because I did the extra step of checking. So that is always like a really fun moment where you're like, aha.
Yeah.
I think
that's literally, Oh, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say.
Sorry. That's literally what my high school
I'm done now. I'm going to take a drink. So go ahead.
That's what my high school teacher used to call it, my history teacher, when you like go through the primary sources and you say, aha, that's when you know you found the argument for your paper because you've solved something. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's absolutely right. And I was just going to add that, I think the distinction, and this is something, again, I think Varsha and I have talked about, in previous episodes, is the distinction isn't between amateur and kind of professional historian. It's just between good history and bad history, right? Because these are skills that people can have, right? And sometimes you need like, a professional training in order to get them, languages and stuff like that. And other times it's just about like being sensitive to what you're doing and how you're thinking about things. Not trusting, these regurgitated facts, but actually looking at the primary sources sometimes with different eyes, refocusing things to see if that's actually what's going on, if you're, paying attention to the great man or maybe the wife next to him or something like that. So, and kind of related to that, I mean, if I could just jump to another question that was asked is like, so, in your research, like, do you have any book recommendations? Like, obviously everybody's going to buy your book when it comes out in a couple of years,
Thank you.
But, until then, like what do you recommend people read if they want to know something about royals?
I mean, I think Antonia Fraser is the one that started me, and she wrote the book about Marie Antoinette that, you know, I became obsessed with. In terms of pop history, which is also, you know, history that feels very accessible, and the sort of history that I fell in love with, like the story-based history. Sarah Vowell is amazing if you haven't read all of her books. And then there's a writer that I'm good friends with named Jennifer Wright, who's written 2 history books. One is about I think it's called It Ended Badly, about 13 historical breakups. And she just is such a funny, warm writer. And then one is about historical plagues. And so those are 2 like excellent pop history books. Yeah, I love pop history because I think it makes history accessible, and it then invites you to do more research about the topics and specifics that you find interesting. And it's been very exciting for me to get to like play detective and not really having that like grad school experience, challenging myself to build that primary source muscle.
Yeah. But it's definitely something that I think everybody gets involved in, right? So like recently, I mean, this is not so recent anymore, but everybody was obsessed with Hamilton the musical, right?
Oh, yeah.
And oddly enough, people who had never thought about Hamilton before, who had watched the musical, actually went out and probably bought, you know, the biography, the
Ron
Chernow
Chernow's
biography.
book became like a bestseller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they either bought that biography or they bought other things, or they started following Joanne Freeman on Twitter and like started really thinking about like the Federalist Papers and the debates over abolition during the period. And I was like, this is awesome. So I do think popular history is a great gateway into this, because I know that if I sent like my students your podcast, they would get super into this and hopefully take a European history class at some point.
And I feel like my European history classes, my professors were so wonderful that it caused like a lifelong fascination. If I can get on my soapbox for like 1 second with Hamilton,
Please.
I think Hamilton's great. It's like a great musical. Like, yeah, of course, it's like a little Obama era-y, but it's like, as a musical, it's amazing. And so when people were like, oh, but it doesn't tell you everything about Hamilton, you're like, yeah, because it's a fucking musical. It's not a textbook. Read a textbook. It's not,
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? Like, it felt insane to me that then people wanted to hold this to the standard, not only of being a great musical, but also being like a great historical text, which is incorrect. And I think that it 100% showed that people had people then bought, you know, Ron Chernow's book and it became a bestseller. I think it succeeded in getting people to think more about Hamilton.
Yeah.
A book, it's not about royals, but that I'm actually reading right now. So I'm writing a young adult novel that's like historic. It's not royal, but it's historical, and it's about like weird medical history. And so I'm reading a book called Dr. Mutter's Marvels about the Thomas Mutter in Philadelphia.
The Mutter Museum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I just finished, it's really fun, a book called The Invention of Murder, how the Victorians created like modern crime fiction.
Whoa.
Yeah.
One thing
really
you should
good book. It's really interesting. If you are interested in that period, it sort of, examines Victorian fascinations with that.
One thing you should read if you're interested in murder, if you're interested in gender and media, is everybody who's watching this should read this. It's something that's required for all grad students of American history. Is The Murder of Helen Jewett by Patricia Klein.
Writing this down.
Yeah, and so basically it's about the murder of a woman who her murderer almost gets away, and the murder and the trial is sensationalized in New York. And basically the historian Patricia Cohen, she talks about ideas about gender, about sex work, because Helen Jewett is a prostitute. And so it's a really fascinating look into how media sensationalizes ideas about gender in like the late 19th century. And so if you're into murder and like that type of stuff in England, the same type of stuff happens in the US. And this type of popular history, it's not a popular history book, but if you get into history because you're interested in personalities and narratives, the story of this woman's murder and her murderer and the trial is like a great way to get students into it, right? And that's what I like about primary sources.
I love it. I'm literally ordering this book right now from my local independent bookstore.
Nice.
One thing I didn't squeeze this in when we were talking about like primary sources getting things, or like secondary sources getting things wrong and then it being echoed. A treat for people listening. My next episode is I was interested in the lack of monarchy in America. The election got me thinking about like that popular myth that George Washington was offered the president to be a king and he turned it down. Like I had just like heard that my entire life. Like, oh, fun fact, Washington could have been a king. That never happened. Wild. I wrote this whole podcast episode and went into it researching, about to be like, can't wait to talk about how Washington could have been the king. It blew my mind. I can't believe how many times I've heard that.
You probably didn't chop down the cherry tree either, from what I understand. But yeah.
I know. Now you're telling me.
The lionization of certain presidents, it excites people, and it's very similar to the way people lionize royal family members. But it also really pisses people off. So anytime you mention, like, you're on like the Berkeley campus and you mention like Lincoln or like Washington, and like people will just be like, no. But in other places of the country, they'll be like, Lincoln is the best president ever. So if I ever get into an Uber and I make the mistake of telling the Uber driver I am a historian, they will spend either the 20 minutes telling me how Lincoln was amazing or how Lincoln was horrible. And I think like that's what you learn when you like try to figure out why we don't have a monarchy.
Did you hear, I mean, they tore down a statue of Lincoln in Portland, and that was like a big thing where you're like, oh, okay, is that what we're doing now? All right.
I think somebody also tore down a statue of Ulysses Grant because of his role in Western Native Wars. So that's another thing that you don't really get. You don't really get the full picture of when you study American presidencies, right? You love the narratives, like Washington is so honest, Lincoln is a great emancipator.
Yeah, we love the idea that like Washington was so benevolent that he turned down being a king because he was just so true to his value. Like, what's that saying that I'm gonna horribly butcher or paraphrase? The idea that like the lies that spread are the ones we want to believe.
Yeah.
Like,
something like that.
Yeah. Right. It's like that misconception spreads because it's so appealing.
Yeah, I think we want simple narratives about the past, right? And I think it's always a historian's job. And again, that this is what kind of breaks down that binary of kind of professional and amateur historian, is that, the history is complicated because it deals with people, right? And people are complicated. And so like, Washington can be this figure who, led the Continental Army to victory and liberated, the colonies and became the first president and stepped down after 2 terms, but was a vicious slave owner, so like those things can coexist. Lincoln can be this person who led the Union, to victory in the Civil War, ended up becoming, kind of the great emancipator, but led a vicious kind of anti-native campaign in the West at the same time. Like those things can kind of coexist in the same world because these are human beings who do these types of things. So.
And I think it goes back to your first episode that you did, which was Marie Antoinette, right? And so what I learned in, I think it was 8th grade or 7th grade when we were doing European history, was let them eat cake. And that's all I really knew about Marie Antoinette well until I got into like 10th grade. And only then did I realize, oh, she never really said that. Or if she did, that's like not what she meant. But at the same time, when you start studying Marie Antoinette in college, you recognize the person who is like this evil, wife of a king is at the same time just a normal woman who has to deal with a lot of shit from her country that doesn't make sense. And that is what makes her a fascinating historical character, which is what I think your podcast touches on, is that these people are just cool historical characters.
Thank you so much. That's so well said. I think some people have criticized, or I've gotten emails, criticizing or questioning that I'm like glorifying Marie Antoinette, or vilifying the underclass in some way. They're like, oh, you're protecting. It's like, well, no, I feel like you can hold the ideas that wealth should not be wildly stratified and a country should not have a queen, and also be like, well, this 14-year-old, when she came to this country and knew no one, like did her job that she was told to do. And also maybe we shouldn't like torture her children. Like, I think those two things can coexist, where you can be against the monarchy and also be like, and I'm against child torture.
Yeah. And while I am against those two things, I am at the same time fascinated with why the French people were obsessed with vilifying her instead of other aspects of the French monarchy at the time. Right. Yeah. And so I think that's what, so like, yeah. So I hope anybody listening to this who or watching this tomorrow who's a grad student is like, I think the benefit of like cool history podcasts, because I listen to a bunch of them, is that they just get into like, they get you into like the kiddie pool. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I mean, that is like, they let you wade into the shallow end of the pool, and then you get to just dive into the really cool stuff with the expertise you learn in grad school.
Yeah.
I mean, the fascinating thing about Marie Antoinette is I bet if you ask like 50 people on the street, like lay people, they would know who the queen, if you're like, who was the queen during the French Revolution? They would know Marie Antoinette, but they probably couldn't say Louis the 16th. They might know, you know what I mean? Like a lay person might not know which Louis it was. I'm like, he was the one who made the decisions.
Yeah. And that itself is a fascinating historical and sociological question. Why does Marie Antoinette get remembered so much as this tragic figure as well as this villainous one, except for Louis the 16th?
Rich, dead white women.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's always the woman's fault. I mean, it's in the Bible.
Exactly.
So. Yeah. No, I think this is fascinating too, and I think that this is such a wonderful. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, and so we do have to wrap up. But it's kind of a nice way to wrap up in that it shows that you can be fascinated and really interested in something in history, and you don't have to lionize it. Like you don't have to like valorize it in any real way. But it can be an incredibly interesting and a subject worthy of study. That demands your attention because it's important, but at the same time, it's not the same as like raising it up, which unfortunately, like, well, to be blunt, like the political right in America likes to do, is to just say like the only way that you can study this thing is to just evaluate uncritically, and that's just not what history does. When it's done well.
It's so boring. Also,
it's so boring. Yeah. It's just so boring. So
it's so boring to look at power and not be critical of it, but at the same time not fully analyze it. So thank you for your podcast about getting us to think about this.
This is it's truly like terrifying and heartwarming to think that anyone in the professional history field would ever listen or care about my little side project. So
professors are people too.
We are
just like royalty.
Yeah. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna put that on my CV next time.
Perfect.
So professors are just like royalty. So thank you so much, Dana, for joining us, and thank you everyone for spending your Friday afternoon or evening with us. We're gonna take a little break on Drinking with Historians. We'll come back after the Thanksgiving holiday on December 4th. We have a very special, I think, episode for you that time. I don't want to, but stay tuned for details about that. I don't want to kind of spoil it there, but check back on Twitter and find us there, or look at us on YouTube. But until then, thank you again, Dana, for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Don't get COVID. Wear a mask. And cheers.
Cheers. Thanks again, Dana.